inSTEM is a holistic mentorship and skills development program. We invite you to bring your whole selves into this virtual learning space. So before I turn it over to the experts, let's pause for a moment of mindfulness.
My name is Dr. Carol O'Donnell, and I'm the Senior Executive and the Director of the Smithsonian Science Education Center at the Smithsonian Institution. And our mission, of course, at the center is to transform K-12 education in collaboration with communities across the globe. My area of specialty is aligned very closely, of course, with the work that we do, which is that we are very interested in promoting inquiry-based STEM education. My professional specialty also is in understanding diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in STEM. I grew up in a fairly under-resourced region within the city of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, and it became very clear to me that education was an absolute crucial part of my ability to have economic mobility, my ability to make choices in my life and to move or to travel. And so I deeply believe that we have to make sure that in our careers, that the work that we do is dedicated to ensuring equity and making certain that all individuals that we work with have access to opportunities. I think that I would say that I probably didn't recognize until later in my career that there was such a thing as goal orientation, and that setting goals could actually make a very big difference in your life in terms of your professional career. Now, when I was younger, I would definitely say that I always had really strong interests and definitely set personal goals for myself without really recognizing it. So for example, when I was younger, I fell in love with learning. And I mentioned to you that I grew up in inner city Pittsburgh, where we actually ended up not having any schools in our neighborhood. I wanted to go to a good school, and I wanted to make certain that I could use education as a form of economic mobility. So I was lucky. I had a very dedicated mother and father who made certain that I could get into a public school across town that had a much better offering for me in terms of a scholars program, and I could take AP courses. And that made a big difference in my ability to then go off to college. So while I wasn't aware of the fact that I was supposed to be setting goals and that setting goals was actually making a difference for me, I, in essence, was setting goals. And it wasn't until I was in my doctoral program at George Washington University where I actually realized that there was such a thing, that people actually studied goal orientation. And it happened one day when I was sitting in an office with my advisor, and my advisor said to me, you get an A+. And she put on a Post-it note, an A+, and she handed it to me. And I must have beamed from ear to ear. And she just looked at me and she said, "You're a performance goal-oriented person, aren't you?" And of course, I didn't know what that meant. Here I was a doctoral student, but I didn't know what that was. And I asked her, and she said, someone who's performance goal-oriented cares very deeply about demonstrating their ability. That you want good grades, you want an important title, you want your salary increased, you want a higher position, and that you do those things because you want to show others that you can. And so again, being performance goal oriented meant you wanted to demonstrate your ability to other people. And then she went on to tell me that somebody who was mastery goal oriented was really just the opposite. They were an individual who did something because they wanted to grow. That it wasn't because they wanted to demonstrate their ability to other people. It was because they wanted to develop their ability. And I learned, of course, later on that this was the work of Carol Dweck, who really focuses on, I think she calls it kind of this ability to have a growth mindset. You know, that you definitely believe that you're not stuck in knowing or doing certain things, and that you'll never be able to achieve something different. That instead of having this fixed mindset that I'm an individual who's stuck in this particular way and I'll never be able to improve, that instead you have this growth mindset and believe that you really can make a difference. And so I'll never forget that moment. I left that meeting with my advisor. I went home, dug into the literature to read more about goal orientation, tried to better understand what it meant to be performance goal oriented and mastery goal oriented. And then I started, of course, applying it to my own children, which I felt so bad about. But, you know, I have 4 kids. They were all in elementary, middle school, high school at the time. And I remembered thinking how important it was to move away from being performance goal oriented to being mastery goal oriented. Because I think I realized that this made the difference between feeling as if you just needed that A+ no matter what, which was sometimes a dreadful feeling, to feeling like, wow, I really learned a lot. That's the beauty of being mastery goal oriented versus performance goal oriented. This idea of goal orientation falls under this like social cognitive framework, which means that if you're a learner, something's motivating you and something's causing you to behave in a certain way in order to achieve your goal. And if you think, as a learner, if you think about yourself, your task, and your performance as being 3 things that you have to be mindful of, then that will allow you to better understand why are you making some of the decisions you are. So for example, when you're given choices in life in which you can decide to choose a path which leads you down performance goal orientation, and you know that if you put yourself, your task, and your eventual outcome or goal or performance in the same category, you can say, all right, so if I choose path A, in the end, I'm going to get straight A's. I could probably be identified as valedictorian, and other people will be proud of me because I was identified as a straight A student who's valedictorian. That's path A. Path B, I take harder courses. I might get B's or even a C, which is an average grade. But and I'll never get identified as the valedictorian, but by the time I'm done, I would have grown so much in my knowledge and skills that when I go off to college, even if I don't get into this top-notch school because I got straight A's, but I get into a school that is really hard and will challenge me, that I'll be successful in that work environment. Because I've seen students who've gone through both paths. They have chosen the path where they avoided certain courses in high school in order to keep their GPA. And then they went off to college with the college expecting them to do really well, and then they failed. Failure, of course, is something we'll talk about later, but this idea of being able to be in a situation where you choose the path in which you grow the most, and accepting the fact that that might not be where the external performances are the greatest, but that you are growing internally. And you know that in the long run, that's going to put you in a better place. If you can do that with each decision that you make and accept the fact that there might be failures along the way, and those are inevitable, but that ultimately it will help you achieve your goals, that help you grow as an individual, then you're more likely to choose path B than to choose path A. I believe that once you apply that particular approach in one of your streams of life, you are it becomes, again, back to Carol Dweck's point, becomes part of your mindset. And you apply it in everything that you do. And again, once I learned about this as an approach to success, to setting goals and achieving them, I started to also see it in my own personal life. It also made me a better advisor to my students. Because I work at the Smithsonian full-time, but I teach part-time for the physics department at George Washington University, and I often will find myself with my students doing the same thing. And so yes, I do think that once you've developed a particular mindset and you become, for example, what you believe is more mastery goal-oriented than performance goal-oriented, you do apply that in all of what you do and the way you talk to others. I mean, I've had students, for example, in my class at George Washington University who've said to me, I'm not good at science. I just want you to know I'm probably not going to do well in this class. And right away from the beginning, I start to have conversations with them about what it means to do well. Because if doing well is getting an A+, that may be too big of a goal to set. And again, it's very external. But if doing well is, I really am interested in learning about it so that I become a better consumer of science in my life, and I enjoy reading articles about it or talking with others about it and feel comfortable. If that's your goal and you set that goal from the beginning, then the path that you take is much more enjoyable. And many of my students that I've had this conversation with at the beginning of a course, instead of dropping it because, oh my goodness, all of a sudden they realize there's math in this class and I'm not very comfortable with math, I don't understand science. But once we have this conversation and they're willing to accept that this is a potential goal they've set, that they work hard and they typically do well. And I think that's why I enjoy thinking about ways to apply it in your personal life, your academic world, and as a student, and also in your work. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about a colleague who I met. I'm part of what's called the Global Classroom. And the Global Classroom is, when the schools shut down across the globe a year ago, we decided, multiple organizations like the World Health Organization, UNESCO, UNICEF, we all came together along with Scarsborough Hall in the UK to develop this thing called the Global Classroom. And one of our speakers was Dr. David Henson. And I will never forget his speech. Dr. Henson was in the military. And sadly, while he was in Afghanistan, a bomb blew off both of his legs. And, he had a very difficult time with this. He decided that he wanted to try to set a goal that would allow him to do something he did not think would be possible. And he chose the goal of running. So, in order to do that, he needed to better understand what prosthetics were out there and how could he better understand prosthetics. And he became so interested in this that he eventually went off to get his PhD in amputee biomechanics. So he took the worst thing that could have ever happened to him in his life and he turned it into something absolutely amazing. And when we interviewed him, we asked him, how in the world did you get to a place where you took this really almost unachievable goal and you were able to achieve it? And he said, to cope with tragedy or to overcome a mental challenge, he does three things. He says acceptance, choice, and simplicity. And acceptance is where you take something that seems almost unachievable and you basically say, there's nothing I could do to change the past, but I can control the future. So you accept that. The second, which is choice, You decide on a choice, which is a goal, and you stick with it. You make a positive choice and you move forward. You tell others about your choice or your goal. You make certain that they hold you accountable for reaching that goal and that you hold yourself accountable for reaching the goal. He says, you have to drive your success. You cannot be a passenger in your own journey. So that's Dr. Henson. And the third thing, simplicity. So acceptance, choice, and now simplicity. So if you set a goal for yourself, some major goal, he wanted to be a runner, but he didn't have legs. And he went through this is a really complicated task. How do I do this? It's too big, it's too daunting. So how do I break it down into simple, achievable tasks? So let's imagine you want to be an astronaut. That's a daunting goal. But to do that, think about the simple goals along the way. I want to take this particular course. Maybe it's astronomy with Dr. O'Donnell at George Washington University. I want to do well in the course based on my mastery goal orientation. And then I want to graduate. Then I want to find these 3 jobs that will lead me to the bigger job of being an astronaut. So he basically says, you accept where you are, you make a choice and tell others so you hold yourself accountable, and you break the goals down into simple tasks that are achievable. And that's one of the things I think that we all apply both in our personal and our professional lives. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is that, go back to that point about simplicity. I think too many times we want to accomplish our greatest achievement at work immediately. You know, we go off, we've graduated from college, and now you're entering your workforce, a new job, your new career. And almost immediately you want to be at the top. And it takes a long time to get there. And I'm not saying that we have to accept that. But I do think that that's a perfectly fine way to go through life, is slow and steady. Because when you take that path, that slow and steady path, you build up so much knowledge along the way and you grow immensely. And it's okay to know that you've got a lifetime ahead of you in your career and that things will change immensely during that time period. But I guess don't try to accomplish so much in a short period of time. It'll come eventually. First of all, this is not my area of expertise, so I want to be careful about this. But I do know that there are a lot of reasons why, people fail or experience failure. And some of those factors, include, you kind of feel anxious. You can just feel your heart racing. So there's this sense of anxiety. You might feel hopeless. You might go home thinking, I'm completely helpless. I wanted to do well today, but I didn't. And, people who have a tendency to be very self-reflective are often people who are put themselves in situations at the end of the day where you're looking back on those moments of successes, but also moments of failure. And there is not a day that does not go by that I don't sit back and think about, what did I do well today? And what did I do that gave me those kind of feelings of failure? Whether it is, again, kind of feeling like low self-esteem or, maybe even a poor sense of self-concept in a particular room. But if you can recognize that those feelings that you might have had over that period of time, that those experiences where you see some of those factors playing out, that those are moments of, in essence, failure, then what you've got to do is put in place just say to yourself, instead of saying, I am a failure, I didn't do this well, instead you say, there are things that I just have to embrace. So, for example, and again, researchers who study this know this better than I do, but they'll basically say, all right, first just accept the emotions that you experienced throughout the day. So if I was really sad, or I felt situationally depressed about something, or felt really anxious, or you just think about that. All right, so state the emotion. This is how I felt. This was my emotional status at that particular moment. You might do something to kind of cope with it. So decide what your coping skills might be for that particular feeling. So for me, it might be I want to talk to my husband, or I pick up the phone and I call my children, and each one of my children each have really expertise in different areas, and I'll call one or more of them to kind of talk it through. I have a colleague at work, Catherine Blanchard, who talks about the importance of breathing. And so in this global classroom, she actually did an event on how to help us experience deep breathing. Breathing is actually one of the most important things that you can do as a healthy coping skill when you're in these situations where you are feeling vulnerable, you are feeling like you're failing. I watched a video, a TED Talk by Dr. Brene Brown, who's a social worker, and my oldest daughter, who's 30, is also a clinical social worker. And I'm sure that many of you may have seen Dr. Brene Brown, give her talk on the power of vulnerability. And I remembered at the time thinking, what does this mean, why would anybody want to put themselves in a situation in which they're vulnerable? Like, man, I try to avoid situations where I feel vulnerable, because sometimes when I feel vulnerable, I feel like I don't know enough, and I just want to go off and cry. And many, many, many situations in my career along the way, I would feel like I didn't understand something, and I would go off on into my private room, and I would just tear up. But it wasn't until, and this is the honest to God truth, it wasn't until I watched her TED Talk, Dr. Brown's TED Talk, where I recognized that, oh my goodness, she's telling us that when we feel the most vulnerable is when we're learning the most. And if we can actually sit back and say to ourselves that, all right, I'm going to set this goal, and there are going to be moments along the way where I fail, but it's at those moments in which I fail that I'm going to grow the most. I'll give you a good example. So back to when I started my doctoral program, I didn't have any statistics background, not even a single course. And I had to take this entry test to determine what my skills were in statistics, and I totally failed on the test. And so GW gives you a choice. They say to you, well, you can go off and take your statistics courses that are required for your doctoral program, or we can give you these remedial courses first that you'll have to pay for, that you won't get any credit for. They're going to take a lot of time. But if you do this, we think it'll better prepare you, because your test shows you don't know a lot about statistics. I remember talking to my peers, and they all said, oh, I'm not taking that course. And I thought, no, I have to take this course, because if I take these courses, then I'll be better prepared and I'll learn more when I get into the real courses. And I did that. And it made a huge difference, because I remembered at the beginning feeling incredibly vulnerable. Every meeting I was in which they were talking about statistics, I didn't understand anything anybody was saying. It sounded like a different language to me. And I was recognizing that, okay, this is a weakness, but this is the place that I'm going to grow the most over the next 5 years. And I'm committed to recognizing that this is something I don't understand, and I'm feeling vulnerable right now, but if I commit to better understanding these statistics, I will do a better job in the end. And that's exactly what happened. So I just say that failure is one of the best parts of being in a place where you recognize that your own growth over time, because it's in those moments of failure when we're learning the most. If you see failure points as points for growth, then you can move away from that kind of unrealistic, irrational expectations around failure and move towards more realistic thoughts about it. So you can say, if I recognize that this is a moment for growth, I'm actually going to be doing better at this in the days to come. And I think that there's just, take advantage of all the incredible research and videos and TED Talks and podcasts that there are on this really important topic, and listen to it and talk to others about it. I know that in my career, I went from struggling for, I'm talking decades, of not recognizing how important moments of weakness, moments of vulnerability, moments of failure are in helping us grow. And so just know that it doesn't come overnight. It could take a while before you build this into your sense of self in both your professional life and your work life. I think the most important philosophy on failure is that if you apply this to being an engineer, we are constantly teaching students about failure points in engineering. And if you think about it, some of the greatest feats of engineering came with hundreds and hundreds of failures along the way. I once saw a poster of Michael Jordan, so this is showing you my age, who of course was a really great basketball player of his time. And there was a poster where it said something like, I missed, it was a whole list. It said something like, I've missed 3,500 free throws. I lost X number of games. And it went on and on about all the things he's never done or didn't do or failed at. And of course, at the time, Michael Jordan was one of the best basketball players and had succeeded in so many ways. And the problem was that people only thought about him in terms of his successes. And what he wanted people to know was that there are a lot of failures that go into building success. And so I think if my personal philosophy around failure is that you will never achieve success as you define it without having many moments of failure along the way. Just as an engineer who's designing or building something to solve a problem constantly recognizes that this thing they've built or designed or engineered has failed, and that they find the failure points and they fix them, and they test it again and they find new failure points and they fix them. And that this is the analogy of life. But eventually you get to those moments where you feel like you've accomplished and reached that large goal that you've set for yourself by setting out those simple goals along the way. Always take the time and the opportunities to share your feelings with others, whether they're your peers, your family back home, and your professors. And do not be afraid to ask questions. That many people avoid asking questions because they're trying to avoid those moments of vulnerability. But it is again in those moments of asking questions that we actually demonstrate our knowledge and demonstrate our interest in growth, in personal growth. So I think the first thing is find that network of individuals, give us opportunities to hold us accountable for our goals that we've set for ourselves, and who we can talk to, and who recognize that failure, if you will, is inevitable, and they will support us along the way. So I would say first, don't be afraid to speak to others, your peers, your colleagues, your professors. Make certain that you are holding yourself accountable for the goals that you set. Be honest when you're not reaching those goals, because there's nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about in that. It is really hard for students today. I think this all of the time when I'm with my students. There is a heavy burden on students today. There is a lot that is expected of them. One course today is probably equivalent to 5 courses when I went to college. The information overload is great. But if you go through the stages, if you will, of, again, set goals, accept what you can and cannot do, and don't be afraid that that's the reality. And then set out simple, achievable goals along the way so that you're not constantly trying to go after something so big that it seems impossible to get there. It is never of any value to spend so much of your time on your work or your schoolwork where you're not also taking advantage of trying to take care of yourself. Is that it does make a big difference in our ability to accomplish our goals by taking care of your personal needs as well as your work needs or your school needs.
We hope you found this useful. For more videos in this series, please visit us at nationalmedals.org/inSTEM.